The blood on Olivia Hartford's wedding dress wasn't hers, but the pain in her chest felt real enough as she stood in the dusty general store of Belmont, Nevada, watching the man she was promised to strike a drifter across the face for looking at her too long. It was August 1878, and the scorching heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, including her future. The drifter stumbled backward, hitting a barrel of grain, his hat falling to reveal dark hair and eyes the color of sage after rain. He didn't fight back, just raised his hand slowly, his jaw already swelling where Gerald Morrison's ring had split the skin. "That's enough, Gerald," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She clutched the bolt of white fabric her mother had sent her to purchase, the material that would become her wedding gown in 2 weeks' time. "A man protects what's his," Gerald said, turning to her with that possessive gleam she'd learned to recognize over the past 6 months since their arrangement had been made. Even a drifter should know better than to stare at another man's woman. "I'm not your woman yet," she said quietly, then immediately regretted it when his face darkened. The drifter used the distraction to right himself, collecting his hat from the floor. His eyes met Olivia's for just a moment, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity, which she'd grown accustomed to from the other women in town who knew about her arranged marriage. Not desire, which she'd seen in too many men's faces since her 18th birthday 2 years ago. It was understanding, as if he could see straight through to the cage she'd built around herself and recognized it for what it was. "My apologies," the drifter said, his voice rougher than she'd expected, tinged with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Meant no disrespect." He walked past them both, the door chiming as he left the store. Olivia watched him go, tracking his movement through the dusty window as he crossed the street toward the saloon. He moved with a slight limp, she noticed, favoring his right leg. "Don't even think about it," Gerald said, his breath hot against her ear as he moved close. "Your father owes my family $1,500. That debt gets paid one way or another, Olivia, either through marriage or through his land. Your choice." It wasn't a choice at all, and they both knew it. The Hartford ranch was all her father had left after her mother died 3 years ago. The land held every memory of the woman who had loved them both, who had planted roses by the front porch that still bloomed every spring despite the harsh Nevada desert trying to kill them. Olivia would marry a man she didn't love to save those roses, that land, those memories. She'd accepted that months ago, but watching the drifter disappear into the saloon, she felt something shift in her chest, like the first crack in a dam before it breaks. "I need to get home," she said, pulling away from Gerald. "My father will be expecting me. I'll escort you." "That's not necessary. I insist." His hand closed around her elbow, not quite painful but firm enough to leave no room for argument. "We wouldn't want anything to happen to my future bride." The ride back to the Hartford ranch took 40 minutes, and Gerald spent every one of them talking about the house he was building for them, the children he expected her to bear, the social standing his family's money would bring her. Olivia made the appropriate noises at the appropriate times, a skill she'd perfected over the months, while her mind wandered to sage-colored eyes and a man who'd taken a blow without returning it. Her father was waiting on the porch when they arrived, his weathered face drawn with worry that eased only slightly when he saw her. Thomas Hartford had aged a decade in the 3 years since losing his wife, his shoulders stooped under the weight of grief and debt. "Thank you for seeing her home safely, Gerald," her father said, and Olivia heard the forced gratitude in his voice. "Always a pleasure, sir. I'll see you both at church on Sunday." Gerald tipped his hat before riding off, kicking up dust that hung in the still air long after he'd gone. "Did he hurt you?" her father asked quietly once they were alone. No more than usual, Olivia said, climbing down from her horse with the bolt of fabric. He hit a man in town for looking at me. Her father's jaw tightened. Olivia, if you truly don't want this, we'll find another way. We'll sell the land, move somewhere else, start over. They'd had this conversation a dozen times, and her answer never changed. This land is all we have left of her. I won't let you lose it because of me. Your mother would never have wanted you to sacrifice yourself like this. Mother married you for love, Olivia said, climbing the porch steps. She had that luxury. I don't. Inside the house, she set the fabric on the dining table and moved to the kitchen to start dinner. Her hands worked automatically, peeling potatoes and chopping vegetables while her mind refused to settle. She kept seeing the drifter's face, the way he'd accepted Gerald's violence without retaliation, the understanding in his eyes. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She was at the mercantile, purchasing supplies for the week, when she noticed him through the window. He was working at the livery stable across the street, mucking out stalls in the brutal afternoon heat. His shirt was plastered to his back with sweat, his movements economical and practiced. "That's Blake Foster," the mercantile owner, Mrs. Patterson, said, following Olivia's gaze. "Drifted into town last week looking for work. Sam hired him on at the stable. Quiet fellow, keeps to himself mostly. Though I heard he got into it with your intended the other day." "Gerald hit him," Olivia corrected. "Blake didn't fight back." "Smart man," Mrs. Patterson said. "The Morrisons own half this town. Fighting back would have only made things worse for him." Olivia paid for her supplies and left, but instead of heading straight home, she found herself crossing the street toward the livery. She told herself it was because she wanted to check on her horse, who was being reshod that day. She told herself it had nothing to do with the man working in the back stalls. Blake looked up when her shadow fell across the stable floor, his hands pausing on the pitchfork he was wielding. Up close, she could see the bruise on his jaw had faded to a yellowish green, and his eyes were even more striking than she'd remembered. "Miss Hartford," he said, and the fact that he knew her name shouldn't have pleased her as much as it did. "Your mare's in the back. Sam's just finishing up with her shoes." "Thank you." She should have walked past him, should have kept going to the back where Sam was working. Instead, she stopped. "I'm sorry about what happened the other day. Gerald had no right." "Man like that doesn't need a right," Blake said, leaning the pitchfork against the wall. "He just needs power and someone smaller to use it on. You're not smaller than him. Wasn't talking about me." His eyes held hers, and that understanding was back, wrapping around her like a blanket. "I know what an arranged marriage looks like, Miss Hartford. My sister was in one back in Oklahoma. She didn't have the strength to fight it. What happened to her? She died giving birth to her 3rd child in as many years. She was 22 years old." He looked away, his jaw working. "Her husband didn't even wait a year before remarrying." Olivia felt the words like a physical blow. 3 years from now, that could be her. Dead at 23, worn out by a man who saw her as property, as a means to an end. "I should go," she said, suddenly desperate to leave, to breathe, to think. "Miss Hartford." She stopped at the door, looking back. Blake had moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "If you ever need help, any kind of help, you can find me. I may not have much, but I know how to disappear, and I know how to help someone else do the same." The offer hung between them, dangerous and tempting. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "Sometimes that makes it easier." He stepped back, giving her space. "Just know the options there. Always will be." She fled, collecting her horse from a bewildered Sam and riding home faster than was safe. Her father was out checking fences, which gave her time to pace the kitchen floor. Blake's words echoing in her mind. He was offering her a way out, an escape from Gerald and the life of quiet desperation that awaited her. But running away meant abandoning her father to the Morrisons' debt, meant losing the ranch, meant proving everyone who'd ever called her selfish right. Sunday came too quickly. Church services in Belmont were held in a converted barn, with Reverend Matthews preaching fire and brimstone to anyone who would listen. The Hartfords sat in their usual pew, 3 rows from the back, while the Morrisons occupied the front row like royalty surveying their kingdom. Gerald turned around twice during the sermon to smile at Olivia, each smile feeling more like a threat than a promise. She kept her eyes on her hymnal, on the reverend, on anything but the future bearing down on her like a runaway train. After the service, during the social hour where the congregation gathered outside to gossip and trade news, Olivia saw Blake. He stood at the edge of the crowd, clearly uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders. His eyes found hers across the distance, and she felt that pull again, that recognition of something she couldn't name. There you are. Gerald appeared at her elbow, possessive hand finding her waist. Come meet the Hendersons. They'll be attending our wedding. He steered her away, but not before she saw Blake's expression darken. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of introductions and wedding talk, each conversation tightening the noose around her neck a little more. Monday morning brought unexpected rain, the kind of summer storm that turned the desert briefly green and filled the air with the smell of sage and wet earth. Olivia was in the barn feeding the horses when Blake appeared in the doorway, soaked through and leading a limping mare. Found her on the road to your property, he said by way of greeting. Looks like she threw a shoe and went lame. Thought you might know who she is. Olivia approached the mare, running expert hands down her legs. This is Jenny Morrison's horse, Gerald's sister. How did you know to bring her here? Sam mentioned you were good with horses. Better than him, he said, though he'd deny it if asked. Blake's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. Plus, I figured if I took her to the Morrison ranch, Gerald might use it as an excuse to finish what he started the other day. You could have just left her, Olivia said, leading the mare into a stall. Saved yourself the trouble. Doesn't seem to be in my nature. He followed her inside, rain dripping from his hat. What can I do to help? They worked together in comfortable silence, Blake following Olivia's instructions as she examined the mare's leg, cleaned the wound, and applied a poultice. His hands were steady and gentle, and he asked intelligent questions that suggested he knew more about horses than he let on. You've done this before, Olivia said, watching him wrap the bandage exactly as she'd shown him. Worked on a ranch in Oklahoma before I came here. Before that, helped my father with his horses in Tennessee. Seems like horses have been the only constant in my life. He finished the bandage and straightened. That and moving on when I wear out my welcome. Why do you keep moving? The question came out before she could stop it, too personal for 2 people who barely knew each other. But Blake didn't seem offended. He just leaned against the stall door, studying her with those knowing eyes. Because staying still means putting down roots, and roots mean commitments, and commitments mean disappointing people when you can't be who they need you to be. He paused. At least, that's what I used to think. And now I'm starting to wonder if running from commitment just means you never get the chance to be anything more than a drifter. His gaze held hers. Never get the chance to fight for something that matters. The air between them felt charged, heavy with more than just the humidity from the rain. Olivia was acutely aware of how alone they were, how close he stood, how easy it would be to close that distance and find out if his lips were as gentle as his hands. I should get back to the house, she said, breaking the spell. My father will wonder where I am. Miss Hartford. Blake caught her hand as she passed, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I meant what I said the other day, about helping you, about knowing how to disappear. I can't, she whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. My father needs me. The debt to the Morrisons would destroy him. What about what you need? No one had asked her that in so long, not since her mother died. The question cracked something open inside her, and sudden tears blurred her vision. It doesn't matter what I need, she said, finally pulling free. Some of us don't get that luxury. She ran through the rain to the house, leaving Blake standing in the barn with the Morrison horse, and the pieces of her composure scattered around him like broken glass. That evening, Jenny Morrison came to collect her horse, accompanied by Gerald and 2 ranch hands. Olivia's father invited them inside out of politeness, and Gerald immediately took possession of Olivia's time, pulling her into the parlor while the others discussed the horse's injury. The wedding's in 10 days, Gerald said, sitting too close to her on the settee. I trust all the preparations are proceeding as planned. Yes, Olivia said, because what else could she say? Good. His hand found her knee, squeezing hard enough to bruise. I've been patient, Olivia, more patient than any man should have to be. But after the wedding, you'll learn what it means to be my wife. You'll learn your place. Fear shot through her, cold and sharp. She'd known Gerald was controlling, possessive, even cruel. But the promise in his words suggested something darker, something that made her skin crawl. I should check on dinner, she said, standing abruptly. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and yanking her back down. You'll stay until I say you can go. Let her go, Gerald. Her father's voice from the doorway was quiet but firm. This is still my house, and she's still my daughter. Gerald's eyes flashed dangerously, but he released her. For 10 more days. Then she's mine, and you do well to remember that, old man. You and this pathetic excuse for a ranch. The Morrisons left shortly after, taking the mare and leaving tension thick enough to choke on. Olivia's father sank into his chair, looking every one of his 53 years. We'll find another way, he said again, but they both knew it was an empty promise. There was no other way. The debt was due, and the Morrisons owned the bank, the law, and half the county. Running would only mean the Morrisons would take the ranch anyway and hunt them down for sport. Unless they ran far enough and fast enough that the Morrisons couldn't follow. The thought came unbidden, Blake's offer echoing in her mind. I know how to disappear. But that would mean leaving her father alone to face the Morrisons' wrath, and she couldn't do that. She wouldn't. The next few days crawled by, each one bringing her closer to a future she couldn't bear to think about. She threw herself into work, helping her father with the ranch, preparing meals, mending clothes, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. But every night, alone in her room, she stared at the ceiling and thought about sage-colored eyes and gentle hands, and a man who'd offered her the one thing she wanted most: freedom. Thursday afternoon found her in town again, picking up the finished wedding dress from Mrs. Patterson, who'd done the sewing. The white fabric had been transformed into something beautiful, delicate lace and careful stitching that should have made her feel like a bride. Instead, it felt like a burial shroud. She was carrying the dress to her horse when she saw Blake outside the saloon, breaking up a fight between 2 drunk miners. He moved with surprising speed despite his limp, separating the men and talking them down with calm words and steady hands. No violence, no escalation, just quiet competence that had both men stumbling away in opposite directions. Their eyes met across the street, and Olivia felt her heart lurch. In 10 days, she'd be Gerald Morrison's wife. In 10 days, this pull she felt toward Blake would have to die, smothered under duty and obligation and survival. In 10 days, She'd lose any chance at knowing what this feeling might have become if given the space to grow. Blake started toward her, but Gerald's voice stopped him cold. "Foster." Gerald emerged from the general store, flanked by two of his ranch hands. "I thought I told you to stay away from my intended." "I was across the street," Blake said evenly. "Hardly seems like I was bothering the lady. Everything about you bothers me." Gerald's hand dropped to the gun at his hip, a casual threat that made several passers-by scatter. "Maybe it's time you moved on to another town, found work somewhere else." "Sam hired me on at the stable. I plan to honor that commitment. Sam can find another stable hand." Gerald smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Consider this your notice. I want you gone by Sunday or things might get uncomfortable for you." Olivia watched the exchange, her hands fisting in the wedding dress. This was her fault. If she hadn't talked to Blake, hadn't looked at him, hadn't let whatever was between them show on her face, Gerald wouldn't be threatening him now. She should walk away, should distance herself, should protect Blake the only way she could. Instead, she found herself setting the dress carefully on her horse and crossing the street. "Gerald, please," she said, inserting herself between the two men. "He hasn't done anything wrong." "He exists," Gerald said flatly. "In my town, looking at my woman with those puppy dog eyes like he thinks he has a chance. That's wrong enough." "Maybe the lady doesn't want to be owned," Blake said quietly, and Olivia's heart stopped. The punch came fast, Gerald's fist connecting with Blake's already bruised jaw. Blake stumbled back but didn't go down, and he didn't fight back. Just straightened slowly, blood trickling from his split lip, his eyes hard as stone. "You want to hit me again, go ahead," Blake said. "But don't pretend this is about her honor or respect or anything noble. You see her the same way you see that gun on your hip. Property. A thing to own and control." Gerald hit him again, and this time Olivia screamed, trying to push between them. Gerald shoved her aside hard enough to send her sprawling in the dirt, and that was when Blake's control snapped. The fight was brutal and swift. Blake might have been a drifter, but he knew how to handle himself, and rage gave him an edge Gerald hadn't expected. They traded blows, crashed through the saloon's swinging doors, and fought across the bar while onlookers scattered and shouted. It ended when the sheriff fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the gunshot loud enough to freeze both men mid-swing. "That's enough," Sheriff Davis barked. He was 60 years old and mean as a rattlesnake, and he owed his position to Morrison money. "Foster, you're coming with me." "Assaulting a prominent citizen is a serious charge. He hit me first," Blake said, wiping blood from his mouth. Miss Hartford saw it. All eyes turned to Olivia, still sitting in the street dust, her dress probably ruined. Gerald loomed over her, his eyes promising retribution if she spoke against him. "Well, Miss Hartford," the sheriff asked, "what did you see?" This was the moment. She could tell the truth, could stand up for Blake, could do the right thing, but the right thing would cost her everything. Gerald would call off the wedding, her father would lose the ranch, and Blake would still probably end up in jail because the sheriff was bought and paid for. Or she could lie, could protect her father's future and her own safety, could let an innocent man take the blame for defending himself. She opened her mouth, unsure which words would come out when her father's voice cut through the tension. "I saw it from the general store," Thomas Hartford said, stepping forward. "Gerald threw the first punch, two of them actually, before Foster fought back." "Is that so?" The sheriff's tone suggested he didn't care one way or the other. "Well, Morrison, that true?" Gerald's face was murderous, but he was smart enough not to call Thomas Hartford a liar in front of half the town. "The drifter was being disrespectful. I was defending my intended's honor." "By hitting him twice while he stood there and took it." Thomas helped Olivia to her feet, his hand steady on her arm. Doesn't seem very honorable to me, the sheriff sighed. Both of you get out of here before I lock you up for disturbing the peace. Foster, I suggest you take Morrison's advice and move on. Won't be so lenient next time. The crowd dispersed, disappointed at the anticlimactic ending. Gerald grabbed Olivia's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. We're leaving, he said through gritted teeth. Now. She's coming home with me, Thomas said, his voice hard as iron. You'll see her at the wedding, Morrison, not before. For a moment, Olivia thought Gerald might actually strike her father. But they were still in public, still being watched, and Gerald Morrison was nothing if not conscious of his image. He released her with a shove. 9 days, he said to Olivia. You have 9 days of freedom left. I suggest you enjoy them because after that, you're mine for the rest of your life. And I have a long memory for slights, Olivia, a very long memory. He stalked off, his men trailing behind him. Olivia sagged against her father, her whole body trembling with delayed shock and adrenaline. Thank you, she whispered. I should have done it months ago, Thomas said. Should have told the Morrisons to go to hell and figured something else out. I've been a coward, Olivia. I've let my fear sacrifice my daughter. Papa, no. Yes, he looked at Blake, who was leaning against the saloon wall assessing his injuries. You really know how to disappear. How to help someone start over, Blake straightened, his eyes widening slightly. Yes, sir. How far would you have to go? How long before the Morrisons couldn't follow? Papa, what are you doing? Olivia asked, afraid to hope. I'm giving you a choice, honey. The choice I should have given you from the start. Thomas turned to her, his weathered face set with determination. You can marry Gerald Morrison and save this ranch, or you can run with Blake Foster and save yourself. Either way, I'll handle the consequences. They'll take everything, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. They'll destroy you. Then they'll destroy an old man with a clear conscience instead of a father who sold his daughter like cattle. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. Your mother would never forgive me if I let you go through with this. I'm not sure I'd forgive myself. Olivia looked at Blake, really looked at him. He was bleeding, bruised, facing exile from the only work he'd found, all because he dared to stand up for her. He was offering her a chance at freedom, at life, at something more than slow death in Gerald Morrison's house. But taking that chance meant trusting a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks, meant abandoning her father, meant running into the unknown with no guarantee of safety or survival. If I go, she said slowly, where would we run to? California, Blake said immediately. I have a cousin in Sacramento who owns a ranch. He'd give us work, no questions asked. The Morrisons' reach doesn't extend that far. Us. She hadn't meant to focus on that word, but it resonated through her like a bell. Blake's eyes softened. I wouldn't offer to help you run and then abandon you on the trail, Miss Hartford. If you trust me enough to leave, I'll see you safe to California. You have my word. And then what? I become a burden to your cousin, a charity case. Then you become whoever you want to be, Blake said. A ranch hand, a horse trainer, a free woman making her own choices. The world's bigger than Belmont, Nevada, and the Morrison family. There's space out there for new lives, new names, new starts. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the most terrifying thing Olivia had ever considered. But looking into Blake's sage-colored eyes, remembering the gentleness of his hands and the quiet strength in his voice, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. When would we leave? She asked. Tonight, Blake said. The longer we wait, the more time Gerald has to prepare. He'll be watching you now, might even try to move up the wedding. If we're going to do this, it has to be fast and quiet. Tonight, Olivia repeated, her mind reeling. But I'd need to pack to prepare to say goodbye. No goodbyes, Thomas said gently. Goodbyes mean witnesses, and witnesses mean the Morrisons find out before you're clear. Pack light, only what you can't live without. Blake, what does she need? Practical clothes, sturdy boots, any money or valuables she can carry. We'll be traveling hard and fast, possibly sleeping rough until we're far enough away to risk towns. Blake grimaced. It won't be comfortable, Miss Hartford. Trail life rarely is. More comfortable than life with Gerald Morrison, Olivia said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They planned quickly, speaking in low voices outside the saloon while the town went about its business around them. Blake would gather supplies and horses, using the last of his saved wages to outfit them for the journey. Thomas would help Olivia pack and create a distraction to cover their departure. They'd meet at the old line shack 3 miles north of the Hartford ranch at midnight, and from there, they'd ride hard for the California border. I'll tell people you went to visit your aunt in Carson City, Thomas said as they rode home together, the wedding dress a bundle of white in Olivia's lap that she'd never wear. Buy you a few days before Gerald gets suspicious. He'll know you helped me, Olivia said. He'll make you pay. Let him try. Her father's jaw was set in a way she remembered from her childhood, from before grief had broken him. The debt was always mine, not yours. I should never have tried to pay it with your life. Back at the ranch, Olivia moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects and committing them to memory. Her mother's china, carefully wrapped and stored. The quilt on her bed that 3 generations of Hartford women had worked on. The view from the kitchen window where she'd watched the sun rise 1,000 times. She packed 2 changes of clothes, her mother's silver locket, a small pouch of money she'd been saving, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Everything else she had to leave behind. Take this, her father said, pressing a leather wallet into her hands. It's everything I have left, $300. Not much, but it's enough to get you started somewhere new. Papa, I can't take your money. You can and you will. He hugged her tight and she felt him trembling. I'm so sorry, Olivia. Sorry for all of it. Your mother would have known what to do, would have figured out a way to fight the Morrisons without sacrificing you. I've failed you both. You're saving me now, she whispered against his shoulder. That's what matters. They ate dinner together, neither of them tasting the food, making stilted conversation about nothing important while the clock on the mantel counted down the hours. At 11, Olivia changed into the most practical dress she owned and pulled on her riding boots. She braided her long dark hair and tucked it under a hat, trying to look as unlike herself as possible. Be safe, her father said at the door, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And be happy. That's all I ask. I love you, Papa. I love you too, honey, more than anything. He kissed her forehead. Now go, and don't look back. The ride to the line shack was the longest 3 miles of Olivia's life. Every shadow could have been Gerald's men, every sound a threat. But she made it without incident, finding the abandoned shack dark and quiet under a sliver of moon. Blake was already there, holding the reins of 2 horses laden with supplies. He'd changed into dark traveling clothes, and even in the dim light, she could see the bruises from his fight with Gerald modeling his face. You came, he said, and she heard the relief in his voice. Did you think I wouldn't, honestly? Wasn't sure until I saw you ride up. He helped her dismount, his hands steady on her waist. This is your last chance to change your mind, Miss Hartford. Once we leave, there's no coming back. Gerald Morrison won't forgive this, and he won't stop looking. Good thing we're not planning to be found then. She met his eyes in the darkness. I'm sure, Blake, more sure than I've been about anything in a long time. He nodded, something like admiration crossing his face. Then we should go. We want to put as much distance between us and Belmont as possible before dawn. They rode north into the night, the horses' hooves muffled by sand and sage. Blake set a punishing pace, clearly taking his promise to get her to safety seriously. They rode for 3 hours straight before he finally called a halt near a small creek, letting the horses drink and rest. "How are you holding up?" he asked, offering her a canteen. "I'm fine," Olivia said, though her legs ached from the ride and exhaustion pulled at her. "How far have we come?" "Maybe 15 miles. Not far enough." He scanned the horizon behind them, looking for pursuit that hadn't come yet. "We'll rest here for an hour, then push on. I want to make it to the Carson Range foothills by tomorrow night." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the horses and the night sounds of the desert. Olivia's mind kept circling back to what she'd done, the enormity of it. She'd run away from her wedding, abandoned her father to his debts, and thrown her lot in with a man she barely knew. By tomorrow, she'd be a scandal. By next week, she'd be a cautionary tale. Gerald Morrison would make sure of it. "Regrets?" Blake asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Surprisingly few," she admitted. "Is that wrong? Should I feel worse about this?" "You should feel however you feel. There's no right or wrong way to process choosing yourself for once." "Is that what I'm doing? Choosing myself, aren't you?" He shifted to look at her, his face half in shadow. "You could have married Morrison, could have done your duty and sacrificed your happiness for your father's ranch. Instead, you chose to run, to fight for a different future. That took courage. Or selfishness. Not everything that benefits you is selfish, Miss Hartford. Sometimes survival requires putting yourself first." They lapsed back into silence, and Olivia found herself studying Blake in the starlight. His profile was strong, his bearing quiet and confident despite the beating he'd taken. He'd risked everything to help her, a woman he barely knew, without asking for anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? You could have just left town when Gerald told you to. Instead, you're helping me run, making yourself a target. Why?" Blake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the stars. "My sister Emma," he said finally. "I told you about her arranged marriage. I was 18 when she married, old enough to do something but too scared to try. I watched her go to a man who saw her as property, watched her light dim year by year, baby by baby, until there was nothing left of the girl she used to be. When she died, I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch that happen again, never let fear stop me from helping someone who needed it. I'm sorry about your sister. So am I." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "But I'm not sorry about this, about helping you. Even if it costs me everything, it'll be worth it to know you got away." Olivia's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead and a lot that could go wrong." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, we should keep moving." They rode through the rest of the night and into the pale light of dawn, stopping only when both horses showed signs of serious fatigue. Blake found a sheltered spot in a small canyon, hidden from the main trail by scrub brush and rock formations. "We'll camp here for the day," he said, helping her down from her horse. "Sleep while we can. Tonight we ride again." Olivia was too tired to argue. She found a flat spot on the ground, used her pack as a pillow, and was asleep within minutes. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Blake moving around the camp. The sun was high overhead, suggesting she'd slept for several hours. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and her lips were chapped from wind and dust. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, sitting up and accepting the cup of coffee Blake offered. "About 6 hours. I would have let you sleep longer, but we need to eat and be ready to move by sunset." He'd laid out jerky and hard biscuits, trail food that was more fuel than flavor. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been dragged behind a horse," she admitted. "But alive. Free." She tested the word, liking the way it felt in her mouth. "When do you think Gerald will realize I'm gone? Your father was supposed to tell people you went to Carson City, right?" "Probably bought us until tomorrow before Morrison gets suspicious and goes looking." Blake sipped his coffee, his eyes troubled. But men like him, they have resources. Money, connections, people willing to do ugly things for the right price. We can't afford to underestimate him. I'm not. Olivia thought about Gerald's face when he'd grabbed her arm, the cold promise in his eyes. He'll come after us. He'll see this as a personal insult and he won't let it stand. Then we stay ahead of him. Blake met her eyes. "I won't let him take you back, Olivia. That's a promise." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. They were past formality now, past propriety. They were two people running for their lives, and the rules that governed polite society no longer applied. They spent the day resting and preparing for the night's ride. Blake checked the horses, redistributed their supplies to balance the weight better, and planned their route using a worn map he carried in his saddlebag. "We'll follow the Carson Range north, then cut west through the mountains toward Lake Tahoe," he explained, tracing the route with his finger. "It's rougher than the main trails, but harder to follow, should slow down anyone pursuing us." "How long until we reach California, at this pace?" "4 days, maybe 5. Depends on the weather and whether we run into trouble." Trouble found them on the 3rd night. They just made camp in a small hollow, exhausted from another hard day's ride, when Blake suddenly tensed, his hand going to the rifle on his saddle. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. "Multiple riders moving fast." Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. "Morrison, maybe, or just travelers. Either way, we can't risk being seen." He was already moving, gathering their supplies. "There's a cave system about half a mile north. If we can make it there, we can hide until they pass." They moved as quickly as they dared, leading the horses through the darkness, every sound magnified by fear. Behind them, Olivia could hear the riders getting closer, their voices carrying on the night wind, spread out. "They can't be far ahead," Gerald's voice, unmistakable even at a distance. He'd found them somehow, had tracked them faster than Blake had anticipated. They weren't going to make it to the caves in time. "Take your horse and go," Blake said, pressing the reins into her hands. "I'll lead them off, buy you time to get away." "No," Olivia grabbed his arm. "I'm not leaving you. Olivia, if they catch us both, this was all for nothing. You have to go, have to get to California. Please." She wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but the riders were getting closer and time had run out. Blake kissed her then, fast and desperate, his lips rough against hers. "Go," he said against her mouth, "and don't stop for anything." Then he was on his horse, riding back toward the pursuers, shouting to draw their attention. Olivia heard gunshots, heard Gerald's men give chase, heard Blake's horse galloping away into the night with half the posse following. She should have run like he'd told her to. Should have taken the chance he'd bought her and made for California. But the thought of Blake facing Gerald's men alone, of him dying so she could escape, was more than she could bear. Olivia had always been good with horses, better than most men gave her credit for. She'd grown up on a ranch, had learned to ride before she could walk, had helped her father break wild mustangs every spring. If there was one thing she knew how to do, it was ride like the devil himself was chasing her. She circled back, using terrain she'd studied during the day, taking a route she hoped would put her ahead of the chase. The moon was bright enough to see by, and her horse was fresh from their earlier rest. She pushed hard, harder than was safe, trusting her mount to find the path. She found Blake and his pursuers in a narrow canyon, 3 of Gerald's men closing in while Blake's horse stumbled on loose rock. They had him cornered, had guns drawn, and Blake's rifle had apparently jammed because he was trying to fix it instead of firing. Olivia didn't think. She just acted, spurring her horse forward with a shout that echoed off the canyon walls. The sudden noise and movement spooked the men's horses, sending them dancing and bucking. One man was thrown, hitting the ground hard. Another fought to control his mount while his gun went flying. Blake used the distraction to get his rifle working, firing a shot over the third man's head that sent him diving for cover. Then he was beside Olivia, grabbing her reins and pulling both horses into a flat-out gallop through a gap in the canyon wall she hadn't seen in the darkness. They rode like fury, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as they climbed into rougher country where the horses had to pick their way carefully. When Blake finally stopped, they were high in the foothills, the lights of distant settlements twinkling below like fallen stars. "You came back," Blake said, breathing hard. "I told you to run and you came back. I couldn't leave you." Olivia was shaking, adrenaline making her hands unsteady on the reins. "Was anyone hurt? One of them got thrown pretty hard. The others will be fine, just embarrassed." He was looking at her like he'd never seen her before, something like wonder in his eyes. "That was the bravest, stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably," she agreed. "But we're both alive and that's what matters." Blake laughed, the sound surprising them both. "You're something else, Olivia Hartford. You know that, so I've been told." She managed a smile despite her racing heart. "We should keep moving. Gerald was with them or close behind. He'll keep hunting." They rode through the rest of the night and into the next day, pushing the horses to their limits. Blake seemed shaken by their close call, his usual calm cracking to show the worry beneath. He kept glancing at Olivia as they traveled, as if reassuring himself she was still there, still safe. When they finally stopped to rest, they were so deep in the mountains that even the wildlife seemed scarce. Blake built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and they sat close to share its light. "I was terrified back there," he admitted quietly. "When you showed up instead of running away like I told you to, I thought my heart would stop." "I was terrified too," Olivia said, "but I meant what I said. I couldn't leave you to face them alone. That's not how this was supposed to work. I was supposed to get you to safety, not the other way around. Maybe we're supposed to keep each other safe." She shifted closer, their shoulders touching. "This isn't just you helping me anymore, Blake. We're in this together now." He turned to look at her, his sage eyes catching the firelight. "Together, I like the sound of that." The kiss was different this time, slower, deeper, full of promise instead of desperation. Blake's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her ache. Olivia leaned into the touch, into him, feeling something shift between them that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. "We should probably talk about this," Blake said when they finally broke apart, though he didn't move away. "About what happens when we get to California. About what this is between us." "What do you want it to be?" Olivia asked, her heart hammering. "I want you to be free to make your own choices," he said carefully. "I didn't help you run away from one man just to trap you with another. When we get to California, you can go your own way if that's what you want. My cousin will help you either way. And if I don't want to go my own way," Blake's expression softened, "then I'd like the chance to court you properly. To see if what I'm feeling, what I think you might be feeling too, is something real, something that could last." "What are you feeling?" Olivia asked, needing to hear him say it. "Like I've been walking around half alive for 10 years and you woke me up." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Like maybe running was what I needed to do until I found a reason to stay still. Like maybe that reason is you." Olivia's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I'm falling in love with you, Blake Foster. I don't know if that's smart or completely insane, given that we've known each other less than 2 weeks and we're currently being hunted by a vengeful rich man. But it's true. It's both, Blake said, smiling even as his own eyes grew suspiciously bright. Smart and insane. Just like running away in the first place. Just like everything about this. He kissed her again, soft and sweet. But I'm falling in love with you too, Olivia Hartford. Have been since the first moment I saw you in that general store, standing up to a man twice your size without flinching. They held each other as the fire burned down, talking quietly about the future they might build together in California. Blake told her about his cousin's ranch, about the work available there, about the small house on the property that might be theirs if they wanted it. Olivia told him about her dreams of training horses, of having land of her own someday, of building something that couldn't be taken away by debt or men like Gerald Morrison. We'll have all of that, Blake promised. I'll work every day for the rest of my life to make sure you have everything you want. I just want you, Olivia said simply. Everything else is just details. They crossed into California 3 days later, the Sierra Nevada mountains giving way to the gentler hills of the western slope. Blake visibly relaxed once they'd put the state line behind them, though he kept them moving steadily toward Sacramento and the safety his cousin represented. Gerald's pursuit had fallen away after their escape in the canyon, either because they'd lost the trail or because he'd given up the hunt. Olivia suspected it was the former, that Gerald was regrouping and planning his next move. Men like him didn't forgive humiliation, and she'd handed him plenty of it by running away and making him chase her across state lines. But with each mile they traveled, the fear loosened its grip a little more. They were going to make it. They were going to be free. Blake's cousin, Benjamin Foster, owned a sprawling ranch outside Sacramento that raised cattle and horses. He was 10 years older than Blake, with the same sage-colored eyes and quiet competence, and he welcomed them both with open arms and no questions asked. Anyone running from something deserves a chance to catch their breath, he said, showing them to the small house Blake had mentioned. You're both welcome here as long as you need. The house was simple but clean, 2 rooms and a fireplace, with a view of the rolling hills and the horses grazing in the distance. Olivia stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of sage and freedom, and felt something in her chest finally unlock. This is home, she said, and knew it was true. They spent the first week resting and recovering from the journey, falling into an easy rhythm of work and companionship. Blake took a job with his cousin, working with the horses and learning the ranch's operations. Olivia joined him, her skill with difficult animals quickly earning Benjamin's respect and a paying position of her own. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch of their little house and watch the sun set, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way new lovers do. Blake told her about growing up in Tennessee, about his father's death, and his mother's remarriage to a man who'd driven both children away. Olivia told him about her mother's illness, about the slow way grief had eaten at her father, about the weight of being the only thing standing between him and total collapse. You think he's all right? She asked one night, a month after their arrival in California. My father. You think the Morrisons have hurt him? Your father's tougher than he looks, Blake said. And he made his choice same as you made yours. He wanted you free, Olivia. That mattered more to him than anything. I know. I just wish I could let him know I'm safe, that we made it. Blake was quiet for a moment, then said, we could write him a letter. Send it to someone in a different town who could get it to him quietly. Let him know you're all right without giving away where you are. They composed the letter together that night, Olivia's hand shaking as she wrote the words. She told her father about California, about the ranch and the work and the little house with the view of the hills. She told him about Blake, about the kind of man he was, about how safe she felt. And she told him she loved him, that his choice had given her a life worth living, and that she'd be grateful for that every day. They sent the letter through one of Benjamin's contacts, a merchant who regularly traveled to Nevada and could be trusted to be discreet. 3 weeks later, they received a reply. Olivia's hands shook as she opened the envelope, afraid of what she might find. But her father's handwriting was steady, his words full of relief and love. "My dearest Olivia," he wrote, "your letter was the answer to every prayer I've said since you left. I'm so glad you're safe, so proud of the courage you showed. The Morrisons were angry when they discovered you'd run, but their anger has been mostly directed at me, and I can bear it. The ranch is still mine for now, though the debt remains. But knowing you're free, knowing you're happy makes any price worth paying. Blake sounds like a good man. Hold on to him and hold on to the life you're building. You deserve every bit of happiness you can find. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. I know I am. All my love, Papa." Olivia cried reading the letter, but they were good tears, healing tears. Blake held her while she wept, his arms steady and sure, and when the storm passed, she felt lighter than she had in years. "He's all right," she said, smiling through her tears. "He's going to be all right." "And so are you," Blake said, kissing her temple. "We both are." 6 months after arriving in California, on a spring morning when the hills were green and the air smelled like wildflowers, Blake Foster asked Olivia Hartford to marry him. They were working with a difficult mare, teaching her to accept a saddle when Blake suddenly said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Olivia looked up, thinking she'd misheard. "What?" Blake set down the training lead and moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I know we said we'd take things slow, that you should have time to figure out what you want without pressure. But I can't keep pretending I don't know exactly what I want. I want you, Olivia. As my wife, my partner, my equal in everything. I want to build a life with you, raise horses with you, grow old with you, if you'll have me. You want to marry me," Olivia said, her heart racing. "More than I've ever wanted anything." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in the general store, when you looked at Gerald Morrison like you were measuring him for a casket. Will you marry me, Olivia Hartford? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a month later in a small church in Sacramento, with Benjamin as Blake's witness and Benjamin's wife Sarah standing up for Olivia. It was nothing like the grand wedding that would have been hers with Gerald Morrison. There was no white dress, no elaborate decorations, no crowd of guests watching. Just two people who loved each other, making promises they intended to keep. Olivia wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Blake wore his best suit with wildflowers in his buttonhole. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Mrs. Foster," he said against her lips, testing out the name. "Mr. Foster," she replied, smiling. "I think I like the sound of that." They spent their wedding night in the little house that had become home, making love slowly and tenderly, learning each other in this new way. Afterward, wrapped in Blake's arms with the moonlight streaming through the window, Olivia felt a peace she'd never known. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me, for giving me a choice, for loving me enough to let me be free." Blake pulled her closer, his heartbeat steady against her back. "You freed yourself, Olivia. I just held the door open." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Blake and Olivia worked together training horses, their complementary skills making them a formidable team. Word spread about their abilities, and soon they were taking on outside contracts, building a reputation and a savings account that grew steadily month by month. 2 years after their wedding, they had enough money to buy their own land, a smaller ranch adjacent to Benjamin's property. It had a house that needed work and pastures that needed fencing, but it was theirs, bought and paid for with their own sweat and savings. What should we call it? Blake asked, standing with Olivia on the porch of their new home, looking out at the land that stretched before them. Hope Ranch, Olivia said without hesitation, because that's what this is. Hope made real. They spent the next year fixing up the house and building the ranch into something they could be proud of. Olivia's father sent occasional letters, his news always carefully vague in case the correspondence was intercepted. The Morrisons had finally called in his debt, he wrote, and he'd been forced to sell the ranch. But he'd gotten a fair price from a buyer who wasn't connected to the Morrison family, and he'd used some of the money to buy a small house in Carson City. He was getting by, he assured her, and was happy knowing she was thriving. On the 3rd anniversary of their escape from Nevada, a stranger arrived at Hope Ranch asking for Blake Foster. He was an older man, weathered and tired, and when he took off his hat, Olivia recognized him immediately. "Papa," she breathed, running to him. Thomas Hartford caught his daughter in his arms, holding her tight while she cried. "Hello, honey. I hope you don't mind me showing up unannounced." "Mind, Papa, I've been hoping for this for 3 years." She pulled back to look at him, cataloging the changes time had wrought. He looked older but steadier, the broken quality she'd last seen in him replaced by quiet strength. "How did you find us?" "I've been getting your letters," he said, smiling. "Wasn't too hard to figure out the general area. Then I just asked around about a young couple who were exceptional with horses. Your reputation precedes you, it seems." Blake emerged from the barn, taking in the scene with understanding. He approached slowly, offering his hand to Thomas. "Mr. Hartford, it's good to finally meet you properly." "Blake." Thomas shook his hand firmly, then pulled him into a hug that clearly surprised them both. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter, for giving her the life she deserved." "She gave me just as much," Blake said simply. "Maybe more." Thomas stayed with them for 2 weeks, helping with the ranch work and getting to know the man his daughter had married. Olivia cherished every moment, the 3 of them working together, sharing meals, talking late into the night. It felt like healing, like the final piece of her old life clicking into place with her new one. On his last evening before heading back to Nevada, Thomas sat with Olivia on the porch, watching Blake work with a young colt in the far pasture. "He's a good man," Thomas said. "Better than I probably had any right to hope for, given how this all started." "The best man I've ever known," Olivia agreed. "I'm happy, Papa. Happier than I ever thought possible. I can see that. It's written all over you." He patted her hand. "I'm sorry it took running away and starting over for you to find it. Sorry I put you in a position where that was necessary." "You gave me a choice when it mattered most," Olivia said. "That's what I'll remember, not the debt or the arrangement or any of it. Just that when it came down to it, you chose me over everything else." Thomas's eyes grew bright. "Your mother would have been so proud of you. I wish she could see the woman you've become." "I think she does," Olivia said, looking up at the stars. "I like to think she does." 4 years after their wedding, Olivia gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after her father. He had Blake's sage-colored eyes and Olivia's dark hair, and he was perfect in every way. Blake was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing their son to sleep with old Tennessee lullabies and teaching him about horses before he could even walk. Watching them together, Olivia felt her heart expand with a love so big it sometimes took her breath away. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Emma, named for Blake's sister who'd never gotten the chance to be free. She was fierce from the start, crying loud enough to shake the rafters and demanding attention with all the authority of a tiny tyrant. Olivia loved her desperately, loved them both, loved the family they'd built from nothing but hope and stubbornness. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and lean times when money got tight. But through it all, Blake and Olivia faced everything together, their partnership deepening with each challenge they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of Hope Ranch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the hills. Thomas, now 8, was teaching 6-year-old Emma how to braid a horse's mane, their laughter carrying on the evening air. "Did you ever imagine this?" Blake asked, his arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Back when we were running through the Nevada desert, did you imagine we'd end up here?" "I didn't let myself imagine anything beyond the next day," Olivia admitted. "I was too scared to hope for more than survival. And now," she leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and leather and home, "now I can't imagine anything else. This life, this family, you. It's everything I never knew I wanted." Blake kissed the top of her head, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you, Olivia Foster, more every day. I love you too." She tilted her head to kiss him properly, still feeling that spark after 10 years, still choosing him every single day. "Thank you for saying those words to me all those years ago, for giving me a choice when I thought I had none." "Thank you for being brave enough to take it," Blake replied. "For running away with me that night." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, marking the sky with points of light. In the distance, they could hear the horses settling in for the night, the gentle sounds of the ranch they'd built together. Thomas Hartford had sold his house in Carson City and moved to California permanently the year before, living in a small cottage they'd built for him on the property. He was there now, probably reading by lamplight, content in his old age to be near his daughter and grandchildren. Life had turned out better than Olivia had ever dared to dream. She'd been promised to another man, had been facing a future of quiet desperation and slow death. But a cowboy with sage-colored eyes had said, "Then run away with me tonight," and everything had changed. She'd chosen freedom. She'd chosen love. She'd chosen herself, and in doing so, she'd found everything she never knew she needed. A partner who saw her as an equal, children who filled their home with joy, land that was truly theirs, and a future bright with possibility instead of shadowed by fear. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how Olivia and Blake had met, they'd tell the story with laughter and love. About the arranged marriage, the desperate escape, the wild ride across state lines with danger at their heels. They'd talk about courage and choice, about the risks worth taking and the love worth fighting for. And every time they told it, Blake would take Olivia's hand and say the same thing. "Best decision I ever made was offering to help her run. Second best was when she said yes. Third best." One of the grandchildren always asked. "Every day I've had with her since," Blake would say, and mean it with his whole heart. Olivia Hartford had been promised to another man, but a cowboy named Blake Foster had said, "Then run away with me tonight," and she'd chosen a different story. A better story. A story that was still being written with every sunset, every shared glance, every moment of the life they'd built together. It wasn't the life she'd been born into or the life that had been planned for her. It was better. It was theirs. And it was everything. Hope Ranch thrived over the years, becoming known throughout California as one of the best places to buy well-trained horses. Olivia's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and people traveled from as far as San Francisco to work with her. Blake managed the business side of things. his steady nature and fair dealing earning them loyal customers and strong friendships throughout the region. Thomas lived to see his great-grandchildren, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family he'd sacrificed so much to protect. At his funeral, Olivia read from a letter he'd written her years before, when she'd first run away. A parent's greatest gift to their child is the freedom to become who they're meant to be. I'm sorry it took me so long to give you that gift, but I'm grateful I gave it in time. The children grew and had families of their own. Young Thomas took over Hope Ranch when Blake and Olivia were ready to slow down, running it with the same care and dedication his parents had shown. Emma married a veterinarian and opened a practice in Sacramento, though she came home often to help with difficult cases at the ranch. Blake and Olivia grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands growing gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminishing. They still worked with the horses when their bodies allowed it, still sat on the porch every evening to watch the sunset, still chose each other with the same certainty they'd felt that night in Nevada when their lives had changed forever. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Blake stood with difficulty and raised his glass in a toast. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a woman in a general store who was braver than anyone I'd ever known. She was facing an impossible situation with grace and strength, and I fell in love with her on the spot. When she agreed to run away with me, to trust a stranger with her life and her future, I promised myself I'd spend every day making sure she never regretted that choice. He looked at Olivia, his sage eyes still as bright as they'd been at 28, still seeing straight through to her soul. I hope I've kept that promise. I hope I've given you even a fraction of the happiness you've given me. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Foster. Then, now, and always. Always, Olivia echoed, tears streaming down her weathered face. Through every lifetime, I'd choose you again. They kissed while their family cheered, 50 years of love and partnership and choosing each other evident in the gentle way Blake cupped her face, the way Olivia's hand found his heart. That night, alone in the house they'd built together, they lay in bed and talked about the life they'd lived. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd married Morrison?" Blake asked. "If you hadn't run?" "Never," Olivia said firmly. "That was never my real future. This was. You were. From the moment you offered me a choice, there was only ever one path forward." "I'm glad," Blake said, pulling her close. "Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Can't imagine being anyone other than your husband, the father of your children, your partner in everything." "Me either," Olivia said. "We did good, didn't we? With our lives, with our family, with all of it." "We did better than good," Blake said. "We did extraordinary." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had for 50 years, safe and warm and exactly where they belonged. Blake Foster passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Olivia's hand in his and a smile on his face. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched over the years, all of them with stories about his kindness, his integrity, his unwavering dedication to the woman he loved. Olivia missed him with an ache that never fully faded, but she didn't waste away in grief the way some widows did. She kept working with the horses, kept spending time with her family, kept living the life Blake would have wanted her to live. And every evening, she'd sit on the porch and talk to him as the sun set, telling him about her day and the grandchildren and the ranch that was his legacy. "We made it," she'd say to the stars, "just like you promised we would." When Olivia Hartford Foster passed away 5 years later, at the age of 87, she was surrounded by 4 generations of the family she and Blake had created. Her last words were, "I'm coming, my love." And she died with a smile, ready to be reunited with the man who'd given her everything by offering her a choice. They buried her next to Blake on a hill overlooking Hope Ranch, under an oak tree they'd planted together on their first anniversary. The headstone was simple: Blake Foster, 1850–1932, Olivia Hartford Foster, 1856–1943. They chose love. They chose freedom. They chose each other. And underneath, added by their children, their story started with a run into the night and ended with a lifetime of love. May we all be so brave. May we all be so blessed. The ranch continued for generations. Each new owner told the story of how it began, about the woman who'd been promised to another man and the cowboy who'd said, "Then run away with me tonight." About the courage it took to choose yourself, the strength it took to build something new, and the love that made it all worthwhile. Their story became legend in the family, a reminder that sometimes the best life is the one you fight for, not the one that's handed to you. That love is a choice made every day, not just once. That freedom is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap of faith into the unknown. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the California hills and the horses settle in for the night, some say you can still see two figures on the porch of the old house. A man and a woman, holding hands and watching the stars come out, still choosing each other across time and distance, and even death itself, because some loves are strong enough to echo through eternity. Some choices are right enough to reshape the world. And some stories are beautiful enough to never truly end. This was one of those stories. The end of a tale about a woman who was promised to another man and a cowboy who said, "Then run away with me tonight." About the life they built together, the family they created, and the love that sustained them through 50 years of joy and hardship, triumph and loss, ordinary moments and extraordinary adventures. It was a story about choosing love over duty, freedom over security, and hope over fear. About two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and changed the course of both their lives forever. And it was a story that lived on long after both of them were gone, in the ranch they'd built, the children they'd raised, and the hearts of everyone who heard it and thought, "Yes, that's what love should be. That's what courage looks like. That's what it means to truly live." Blake and Olivia Foster's legacy wasn't just Hope Ranch, or the horses they'd trained, or the family they'd created. It was the reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say yes when someone offers you a way out of an impossible situation. That sometimes love at first sight is real and right and worth fighting for. That sometimes running away is the same thing as running toward everything you're meant to be. Their story had a beginning in a dusty Nevada town, a middle filled with adventure and love and the hard work of building a life, and an end that was really just a transition to whatever comes next. But the truth at the heart of it never changed. She was promised to another man, the cowboy said, "Then run away with me tonight," and she chose freedom. She chose love. She chose him, and that choice made all the difference.